hearing the phrase child genius, it's easy to imagine someone who's simply smarter than everyone else around him. The kid who always has all of the answers, the one who can outthink adults, and the one who always surprises us with their brilliance. But in cartoons, the trope of the child genius has always carried much more weight than that. These characters are never just smart kids, they're symbols, each one reflecting something deeper about intelligence, childhood, and the society that surrounds them. Sometimes the child genius is the one that represents optimism, the idea that the next generation will be sharper, more innovative, and more capable of solving problems than we are. Other times their brilliance highlights isolation, showing us what it feels like to be different in a world that doesn't always value or understand intelligence. And sometimes the genius isn't about big inventions or world-saving ideas at all, but about being the voice of reason, the conscience, or even the quiet labor that helps someone else succeed. And honestly, that's what makes the child genius trope so fascinating. No two examples are exactly alike. Each one embodies a unique symbolism that goes far beyond the surface level. In this video, we're going to take a closer look at some of the most memorable child geniuses in cartoons. Not just to celebrate their intelligence, but to ask, what do they really represent? What deeper truths do these characters reveal about childhood, society, and the way we view intelligence itself? Jimmy Neutron and Lisa Simpson are two characters who on the surface seem to live in completely different worlds. But when you look deeper, they actually mirror each other in symbolic ways. Both of these characters show us that intelligence, while often framed as a gift, can also become a burden. For Jimmy, his genius expresses itself through inventions. His mind can create incredible technology and things far beyond the imagination of his peers. But that brilliance is also the very thing that isolates him. Instead of admiration, his peers often respond with annoyance, fear, or mistrust because his inventions often create chaos instead of preventing it. They constantly spiral out of control, leaving Jimmy responsible for disasters that only he can fix. In this way, his genius is both a blessing and a curse. Symbolically, Jimmy represents how raw intellect, without foresight or restraint, can alienate someone from the very community they're trying to serve. He's not always the hero people run to. Sometimes he's actually the reason that there's a problem in the first place. Lisa, on the other hand, embodies a different but equally heavy side of this paradox. Her intelligence isn't technology heavy, but it is emotional. Lisa sees the world for what it truly is, and she recognizes the flaws in society that others would choose to ignore. Where Jimmy is weighed down by the fallout of his own creations, Lisa is weighed down by her awareness of the world around her. Her intelligence forces her to see too much, and that makes her feel alienated. Not because she's wrong, but because she's right in ways that unsettle people. Instead of being admired, she's often dismissed as being too serious or annoying. She's seen as a child who refuses to simply enjoy childhood the way that others do. Together, both Jimmy and Lisa symbolize two sides of the same cautionary tale about knowledge. On Jimmy's end, he represents the burden of control. What happens when your brilliance causes problems that you never intended? And Lisa represents the burden of awareness. What happens when you know the truth that nobody else wants to face? Both carries weight that their peers can't understand. And both show us that being extremely intelligent as a child is rarely celebrated in the way that we imagine it should be. What's fascinating is that neither of them are truly embraced for their genius. Jimmy is more often resented than praised, and Lisa is more often dismissed than respected. Symbolically, this reveals a broader truth. Society claims to value intelligence, but in practice, it often ignores those who truly possesses it, especially when it makes them uncomfortable. And when you place Jimmy and Lisa side by side, they feel like reflections of one another. Jimmy shows the chaos of unchecked creation, while Lisa shows the despair of seeing too much truth. One is burdened by the consequences of his own ideas, and the other by the weight of everyone else's ignorance. When we talk about child genius characters, AJ from Fairly Oddparents doesn't always come up first. He isn't the star of the show, and unlike characters such as Jimmy Neutron and Lisa Simpson, he doesn't drive the narrative. But symbolically, AJ is one of the most layered and overlooked examples of the child genius archetype. At his core, AJ represents knowledge in its purest form. In a universe where Timmy Turner is given magical shortcuts to escape responsibility, AJ stands as the counterpoint. He doesn't rely on fantasy or wish fulfillment. He uses his mind. His intelligence is both his greatest asset and his heaviest burden. Because unlike Timmy, AJ doesn't get to run away from the weight of what he knows. He has to confront the challenges of his life directly. And that makes him a quiet but profound reminder that real progress comes from effort, persistence, and curiosity, not from instant gratification. Symbolically, AJ embodies the forgotten genius. He's brilliant, but he's not often celebrated. His contributions often fade into the background, overshadowed by chaos, comedy, or more entertaining characters. This reflects a societal truth that those who embody brilliance, especially at a young age, are often overlooked in favor of those who embody spectacle. AJ's genius is undeniable, yet the narrative rarely places him in the center. And that invisibility carries a deep symbolic weight. And what makes AJ even more significant is his identity. As a black boy genius in the early 2000s Nickelodeon, his presence was revolutionary. Children's cartoons at the time often lead into negative stereotypes, but AJ broke the mold. He wasn't the comic relief or the troublemaker. He was the smartest kid in the room. And in that way, he represented Black excellence in a space that often erased it. He stands as proof that brilliance isn't bound by race. And his role challenges viewers to reconsider which kinds of intelligence society chooses to spotlight and which it pushes to the margins. There's also a striking contrast between AJ's science and Timmy's magic. Timmy's fairies give him an instant solution, but AJ's quote-unquote magic is earned through discipline, study, and experimentation. In a way, his inventions and ideas are his form of magic, but it's rooted in hard work rather than shortcuts. This makes AJ a symbolic figure of persistence, the reminder that transformation in the real world doesn't come from wishing problems away, but from grinding through trial and error until victory is achieved. When we place AJ in the larger landscape of the child genius characters, he isn't just another smart kid. He's the embodiment of persistent in a world addicted to shortcuts, the overlooked brilliance that society too often fails to celebrate, and a cultural corrective that dismantles damaging stereotypes by existing as unapologetic proof of Black excellence. Phineas and Ferb stand out in the landscape of child geniuses because their genius carries none of the usual burdens we associate with the trope. Their genius is actually a metaphor for something way larger, the uncontainable wonder of childhood itself. It's not weighed down by the need to solve problems or prove themselves. It flows directly from imagination, curiosity, and joy. The inventions they dream up are not simply technological advances. They are living symbols of what happens when creativity is free from fear, doubt, or adult control. Where most child geniuses wrestle with the consequences of their knowledge, Phineas and Ferb embodies the purest form of possibility, unshackled by limitation. And symbolically, their intelligence represents the way that children see the world as endlessly open. To them, there isn't a dream that's too big, too complicated, or too unrealistic. Their creations aren't bound by limitation, but they're open to the thrill of discovery. They represent the idea that being a child genius is not just about responsibility, but about expansion. The act of reaching beyond the possible simply because imagination allows it. And this positions their work as more than just playful experimentation. Their inventions become metaphors for how imagination has the power to reshape reality itself. In their world, the ordinary transforms into the extraordinary, showing how youthful creativity can ripple outward and change the environment for everyone around it. Their genius is not isolating. It's communal, contagious, and transformative. But I will say, embedded within this symbolism is a quiet tragedy. Despite the magnitude of what they create, the brilliance of their work is often unnoticed or overlooked by the adults around them, especially their mother. And this mirrors a deeper societal pattern in the way that childhood imagination is often undervalued, or even treated as insignificant in the eyes of authority. Their genius is breathtaking, yet it remains invisible to those who cannot recognize its worth. But at the same time, it's also a part of the true meaning of their story. Their creations aren't monuments that are meant to last forever. They're simply representation of possibility, the reminder of how magical childhood feels while it's happening. Just as childhood itself is temporary, so are the wonders that they build. And I honestly think that's the whole point. The fleeting nature of their inventions makes their genius even more symbolic. Placed alongside other childhood geniuses in cartoons, Phineas and Ferb symbolize freedom. Where others represent the burden of knowledge and the weight of responsibility, these two embody the boundless joy of creativity in childhood. Huey Freeman from the Boondocks is one of the most profound interpretations of the child genius trope. His brilliance is not built on equations or inventions, but on perception. And his genius is not measured in what he creates with his hands, but in what he refuses to ignore with his mind. Huey represents the painful truth that intelligence is not just about intellect, but also about awareness. He sees the injustices, hypocrisies, and systematic failures around him with a clarity that most adults deny and most children are shielded from. Where others cling to conforming illusions, Huey strips them away. And in doing so, his genius is often seen as a burden to others. He's awake in a world desperate to stay asleep. While other prodigies engineer gadgets or calculate solutions, Huey builds something arguably more powerful: revolutionary thought. His brilliance takes the form of truth-telling, unfiltered by the compromises of adulthood. He speaks the words no one wants to hear and truths that cut too deeply to be dismissed. Symbolically, Huey represents resistance in its purest form. And that clarity and vision is something that society powers finds threatening, because it can't be controlled. And that clarity is what isolates him. Huey is often alone, not physically, but mentally. And it's not because he's wrong, but in the eyes of others, he's too right. His insight exposes contradictions that the world would rather ignore. And this is what makes him a mirror of visionary thinkers across history. Those whose warning and wisdom were mocked until the world was ready to face them. His genius reflects the tragic paradox of being ahead of your time. That knowledge may come early, but recognition almost always comes late. Huey also embodies the tension between innocence and awareness. He's still a child, vulnerable and playful, drawn to the simple joys of youth. But his mind carries the weight of truths that typically belong to someone far older than he is. And that duality makes him one of the most heartbreaking portrayals of the child genius when you really think about it. The image of innocence cut short by knowledge. The paradox of a boy who should be dreaming but instead is forced to confront the world's nightmares. His character makes you wonder, what happens when childhood is pierced too soon by the knowledge of suffering? What does innocence mean when awareness refuses to wait? But Huey's genius goes far beyond personal perception. It's cultural, historical, and political. Even his name is a reminder of this. He's named after Huey P. Newton, co-founder of the Black Panther Party. Through him, the Boondocks ties the struggles of past generations to the present, positioning Huey as the inheritor of radical thought. He's a vessel for the continuation of revolutionary awareness, and proof that this way of thinking does not always require adulthood. This makes Huey distinct among the other child geniuses in animation. Jimmy Neutron shows us the chaos of invention, Lisa Simpson represents the despair of overthinking, and Phineas and Ferb shows us the boundless joy of creativity. But Huey shows us the cost of truth. His genius is not celebrated but alienated. It's not playful but prophetic. He embodies your child genius not as an admired prodigy, but as a prophet ignored by those around him. A warning that brilliance can be dismissed when it exposes what society doesn't want to face. And lastly, Huey reminds us that sometimes the most intelligent voices are the ones heard the least. Dexter from Dexter's Laboratory represents one of the most classic and recognizable depictions of the child genius trope, the isolated prodigy. He's highly intelligent, endlessly inventive, and far ahead of his peers, but instead of being celebrated, he's often misunderstood and left alone in his world of machines. Dexter symbolizes the struggle of many gifted children in real life, praised for their brilliance in theory, but excluded socially in practice. His isolation is built into the DNA of his character. He spends nearly all of his time hidden away in his secret laboratory, pushing the boundaries of science, yet finding little connection to the outside world. Even at home, Dexter's brilliance goes unrecognized. His parents are oblivious to the vast world that he's built beneath their feet, and his sister constantly interrupts his experiments. And although it's played for comedy, this represents how the world doesn't really understand or respect his genius. His genius is undermined by chaos and trivialized by those who can't see its value, mirroring how society often dismisses things of this nature. His brilliance is treated as both fascinating and laughable, a spectacle to admire from a distance but never fully embrace. Gifted children in reality are often told that they're special, yet that specialness sometimes isolates them. It makes them anomalies rather than members of the community. And that points back to Dexter, where his genius, although it brings him joy, it also deeply isolates him. Unlike other child prodigies in animation whose creativity is celebrated and shared with friends, Dexter's inventions typically remain hidden. And because of this, symbolically, his laboratory becomes a sanctuary but also a prison. A place where he can freely express himself, but also a reminder of the solitude that his genius brings. Dexter's a reminder that brilliance and belonging doesn't always go hand in hand in society. He reflects society's fascination with extraordinary ability, while also exposing its unease with disruption and difference. And his character forces us to confront a difficult question. What is the cost of being exceptional in a world that's built on conformity? Susan and Mary Test embody another angle of the child genius trope. Brilliance consumed by obsession. Their lives revolve almost entirely around science, with their basement transformed into an endless laboratory of gadgets and dangerous contraptions. Their genius is impressive, but it often comes at the expense of balance and even human connection. The twins approach life as a long experiment. Their younger brother Johnny frequently becomes their test subject, not out of malice, but because their pursuit of experimenting often overshadows their ability to see him as anything other than a guinea pig. And this dynamic highlights the tension between logic and wonder. Intellect pursued so intensely that it erases the imaginative joy that makes childhood meaningful. Everyday experiences that could serve as moments of fun are often converted into a science project. Instead of being kids and joining in on play, they reframe it as data collection. And instead of valuing imagination for its own sake, they reduce it to another chance to test a theory. Symbolically, this shows how pursuit of knowledge, when overextended, can cause someone to miss out on enjoying the joys of youth. What makes Susan and Mary especially compelling is that their genius is frequently driven not just as curiosity, but as personal obsession. It often becomes tangled with immaturity, tunnel vision, or shallow motivations. In this sense, their intelligence is not portrayed as balanced wisdom, but as a cautionary tale. Brilliance without emotional grounding can distort priorities and leave little space for joy, empathy, or connection. Thematically, the Test Sisters serve as a counterpoint to other child geniuses in animation. Where characters like Phineas and Ferb embody creativity as a celebration of wonder, Susan and Mary reveal the risk of intellect stripped of playfulness. Moon Girl is an example of a child genius who stands apart because she represents something bigger than intelligence. She represents hope. Her character embodies the belief that children are not only the future, but that they can possibly succeed where adults have failed. What makes Moon Girl so powerful is not just the scale of her intellect, but how she chooses to use it. At her core, Moon Girl represents optimism. She reflects a cultural wish that the next generation will be better prepared to solve problems that adults created or ignored. From environmental crisis to systematic inequality. Unlike many child geniuses portrayed as self-absorbed or detached from those around them, Moon Girl's intelligence plays a big part in her community. She invents to protect, uplift, and reimagine a better future for the people closest to her. In this way, her genius is not a solitary pursuit. It's an act of service. Representation also lies at the heart of her story. For decades, the archetype of the scientific genius was dominated by older white male figures, both in fiction and historical narratives. But Moon Girl breaks that mold entirely. She's a young black girl from New York and is recognized as the smartest person in the Marvel universe. Symbolically, she redefines what genius looks like and expands the idea of who can embody it. Her character reflects a cultural shift, the recognition that brilliance is not bound by one demographic, but can emerge from diverse voices and communities that have historically been excluded from stories of innovation. And Moon Girl's partnership with Devil Dinosaur adds another symbolic layer. On the surface, it may seem like an odd pairing, a young scientist alongside a massive prehistoric creature, but together they create a powerful metaphor. Moon Girl represents intellect, reasoning, and innovation, while Devil Dinosaur embodies primal instinct, raw power, and untamed nature. Their bond suggests that true progress requires balance, not just thought, but action, not just logic, but courage, and not just the future, but also grounding the past. Also, Moon Girl's intellect is never separate from empathy. And because of that, she reimagined what it means to be a child genius. One who measures success not in personal achievement, but in collective betterment. Ultimately, Moon Girl symbolizes the belief that the future of innovation depends on expanding our definition of who we see as capable of leading. She's not just a child genius saving the day. She's a cultural statement. Her story affirms that brilliance belongs to everyone. To girls, to black children, to voices that have been long overlooked. And that the power to change the world may rest in the very people that society underestimates most. Gretchen from Recess might not be the flashiest genius child in animation, but she is one of the most grounded and symbolic portrayals of this archetype. Often referred to as the brainiac of her group, Gretchen represents something more profound than raw intelligence. She's the voice of logic in a world where childhood is often defined by chaos, play, and impulse. But what makes Gretchen especially compelling is that she isn't portrayed as an isolated loner. Instead, she's fully integrated into a group of friends who are all vastly different from her. A natural leader, a tough enforcer, an athlete, a shy newcomer, and a gentle dreamer. Within this little playground society, Gretchen functions as the anchor of reason, offering clarity when emotions, immaturity, or peer pressure threatens to take over. Yet her brilliance doesn't make her untouchable. In fact, it often collides with her very human desires, the need to belong, to be recognized, and to prove herself. This tension reveals the important truth that being the logical one doesn't erase insecurity. Even though she's the voice of reason, she's still just a child. She desires the same level of acceptance as everyone else. Gretchen also represents the bridge between intellect and community. She recognizes the value of knowledge, but also understands its limits when cut off from human connection. Her genius is never about existing above others. It's about illuminating what her friends can't always articulate and seeing the humanity in those who might otherwise be overlooked. In this way, she embodies the idea that intelligence is incomplete without empathy. At times, her logic serves as a challenge to authority itself. She questions the systems and rules that adults impose, exposing how flawed they can be. And in doing so, she demonstrates one of the most symbolic powers of the genius child. It's not just about solving equations or inventing machines, but asking the questions that adults avoid, ignore, or take for granted. Still, her intelligence often highlights the bittersweet truth that logic can reveal problems, but it doesn't always change them. Gretchen can explain why certain social systems are unfair, but she isn't immune to their influence. Like her friends, she still feels the pull of peer pressure, popularity, and playground hierarchies. And this reflects the broader reality that knowledge can give us clarity, but it doesn't necessarily protect us from being shaped by the world around us. Symbolically, Gretchen shows us that the child genius trope doesn't just have to be about world-saving inventions or philosophical revelations. Sometimes it's about being the one who can put words to what others can't fully explain. She represents the hope within every community, that there will always be someone whose clarity cuts through confusion. The last child genius that I'll be talking about today is Wade from Kim Possible. Wade, in my opinion, is one of the most striking portrayals of the child genius trope. And it's not because of how loudly his brilliance announces itself, but actually because of how quietly it operates. He's a technological mastermind who powers every one of Kim's missions. He designs the gadgets, hacks into the enemy system, tracks villains across the globe, and provides real-time intelligence when she's in the field. Kim may be the visible hero, the one who leaps into action and takes the credit, but Wade's intellect hums in the background and helps make her victories possible. This makes Wade the perfect symbol of what I like to call the invisible genius. He represents the brilliance that helps others success without being celebrated. The kind of mind that powers the world in the shadows, while others stand in the spotlight. Wade reminds us of the people behind the curtain, the innovators and the quiet problem solvers whose contributions are essential but rarely recognized. His character forces us to reflect on our own lives and who are the Wades around us, the people whose unseen genius allows us to succeed. And his role also exposes the darker side of genius. Unlike child prodigies who dazzle the world with inventions or public displays of brilliance, Wade exists entirely behind a screen. His life is confined to his room, where his mind reaches further than his physical body ever does. This confinement is played as a quirk, but symbolically it has a deeper meaning. Wade embodies the isolation that often shadows great intelligence, the loneliness of being too advanced, too specialized, and too absorbed in technology to participate fully in the outside world. This detail becomes even more powerful when viewed through the lens of early 2000s, a time when society was just beginning to grapple with the rise of the digital age. Wade was more than a child genius. He was a reflection of the cultural anxiety. He symbolized the fear of a generation growing up online, connected to infinite information, but disconnected from tangible experience. His brilliance came with a cost. Access to knowledge and power, but at the expense of freedom and innocence. His life suggests that genius, when filtered entirely through technology, risks becoming a kind of self-made prison. On one hand, he represents the liberating potential of technology, the ability to connect, to innovate, and to make an impact without boundaries. But on the other hand, he embodies the risk of confinement, of becoming so tethered to screens and systems that the outside world slips away. He's both the invisible labor that allows heroes to succeed and the shadow side of progress. A reminder that for all the brilliance technology can unlock, it can just as easily trap us. So when we look back at all of these characters, we see a pattern emerge. They're more than just smart kids. Each character is a mirror reflecting a different truth about intelligence, childhood, and society. Some, like Phineas and Ferb, remind us of the boundless joy of imagination, the way children can dream without limits before the weight of adulthood sets in. Others, like Jimmy and Dexter, shows us that genius can lead to isolation, while Lisa and Huey embody the painful side of awareness and being misunderstood, the loneliness of seeing too much of a world that refuses to change. Together, these characters reveal the full spectrum of what it means to be extremely intelligent. Their stories tell us that genius in children is never just about solving a hard math problem, but sometimes it's about carrying burdens earlier than most. It's about being dismissed for speaking truths that no one wants to hear. Or in some cases, it's about finding joy in imagination even when adults can't see it. The child genius trope is so symbolic because it touches on something so universal: the tension between potential and reality. Every child carries a spark of possibility. Every generation gets the chance to see what the last couldn't, and to build what the last one failed to imagine. But with that spark comes weight. The knowledge that brilliance can isolate as much as it can inspire. In the end, the child genius is less about being smart and more about being human. They represent symbols of hope, caution, burden, and possibility all wrapped into one. They remind us that intelligence, no matter how amazing, is always tied to the human struggle for connection, understanding, and meaning. And that's the greatest lesson these characters leave us with. Genius isn't just about what you know or what you can create. It's how you carry that knowledge, how you use it, and whether you let it separate you from the world or help you change it.